In this video, we're going to be drawing Kid Goku as a drawing lesson. As part of this, we're going to be looking at how you study a character design from a great master like Akira Toriyama. How to break down the proportions, how to draw this character in 3 dimensions, how to sketch some different poses, and how to create a simple illustration using a simple, reliable process. In this case, we're going to forget the fancy brushes, the brush packs, all of that nonsense, and we're just going to focus on process. Doing a sketch, defining a pose, and then a construction drawing, some finished lines, and then simple flat color. This allows us to focus on the foundations of illustration without getting sidetracked. It allows us to create and iterate great drawings and illustrations and learn the fundamentals in an effective way. As part of this, we're also going to be looking at Akira Toriyama's The World art book, which I think is a great example of line and color comic book style. Great designs and just great Akira Toriyama work. As usual for Drawing Codex video, this is going to be neither fast-paced nor heavily edited. This is a real-time, fully narrated drawing lesson. So, if that sounds interesting, hopefully you'll join me. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about line and color illustration, the same style that I create all my comics and illustrations in, you can check out my free quick start guide. It's aimed to get you up and running quickly in Photoshop, developing your own simple, reliable line and color process. It's free. The link will be in the description. Go check it out. Before we jump in here, I just want to talk a little bit about what we're doing here. As I said, this is a drawing lesson. You can think of it as such. We're going to use the subject of a fun thing to draw, like Akira Toriyama's Goku, the cute little version of that, and see if we can understand how to learn some basic drawing fundamentals and design fundamentals just through studying a character like this. Now, at the Drawing Codex, I am all about trying to figure out how to draw cool stuff from our imagination, and also teaching you to draw your own characters, to make your own Dragon Ball, to make your own Chrono Trigger designs. But I do think as a drawing lesson, picking a character that we all know and is really good is just a great way to kind of cover the foundation. So that's the point here. But understand, this is not really about drawing fan art. This is about studying a master of character design and using those great proportions to practice our own drawing ability. So we're going to go through a couple of different things here, looking at how to break down a character like this, how to think about proportion. We're going to look at the Akira Toriyama book because I think it's a great example. Then I'm going to basically do a demo and illustrate how you would take one of the poses that we create as a sketch and just take it through the first stage of refinement, doing a construction drawing, which I think is really important when it comes to understanding what will actually make the difference with your illustrations looking polished and professional. Then we just ink it, some finished lines, and then lastly, we're going to add some really simple color. And this is just there to demonstrate that often, if you want to get better at illustration, drawing, composition, you kind of have to draw a lot of cool pictures and figure out how these things work for yourself. And picking a simple, reliable process is one of the best ways to do that because it allows you to create a finished illustration in a reliable way and do it again and again. So that is the point of this drawing lesson. Let me know what you think of this in the comments down below. And other than that, let's get started. Toriyama is, I think, a really great example of a number of things. Firstly, great character design, and also something I'm often talking about on the channel, which is just using a simple process. If you look inside this classic Akira Toriyama book, you can see so many great designs, so many great illustrations just rendered with simple line and color process. Now, some of them have a little bit more rendering, some of them have more rendering, some of them have almost no rendering. They're just really simple flat colors. And that's kind of what I want to talk about in this demo, is look at the power of design, the power of the shape language, and just dive into what makes a great character like Kid Goku tick, and how we can kind of break down that form and add a little bit of structure and repeatability to it. But I grew up kind of really liking Akira Toriyama's work, even though I never read a huge amount of Dragon Ball Z. I never watched a huge amount of Dragon Ball Z, but I am a huge Toriyama fan. So we'll check out that art book a little bit more because I think it's just a great art book to check out. But let's look at the basics of what we're going to be doing here. We are firstly going to see if we can break down some of the proportions that exist within a character, such as the younger Goku character. And we're going to look at how we can add structure to that, how we can think about understanding the design, the iconography of the design. I'll talk a lot about combining these really graphic shapes that you often see with a great Toriyama design, where there's not a lot of dimension rendered, but we're mostly looking at the iconography and the big shapes of the hair and stuff like that, and kind of how you can think about adding dimensionality to your characters while you maintain some of that. Because I think that's a really important thing that often gets lost when it comes to thinking about structure versus style, craft versus style, and craft and technical drawing ability mixed with symbology and iconography. And what Goku is, and what a lot of manga does really well, is really leverages the symbolic understanding of the world, which is to say you can tell the difference easily between characters based on the symbol almost of their hair or their features. And I think it's often something that is greatly overlooked when it comes to people designing great characters and also learning to draw. So what I'm normally doing when I come to break down a character like this, and we'll just sort of go through it, is to look at the simple proportions. Now, there's a number of different versions of Kid Goku, where it seems like sometimes he's older, sometimes he's younger, sometimes his head is bigger, sometimes his head is smaller. But I'm going to go for something somewhere in between. And a good way to think about proportion when you're breaking down any character is to think about how many heads, right? Like how many heads high is he? And I think normally in this form, it really feels as if the character is about 3 heads high. But sometimes you can really see when he seems like really small that he's almost like 2 heads high. It's like 1 head plus a tiny little body. And understanding that most drawing is really a matter of thinking about proportion in this way. So before we even start thinking about adding dimension or structuring anything, we can just get those basic proportions there. And I'm going to start a little bit in between. Maybe he's like 1, he's kind of like two heads high, right? Maybe 2.5 heads high, something like that. And so what we have is we have the sort of skull shape. We got that epic big hair, right? And even though this is not a realistic drawing, I'm still going to try and utilize a lot of structural form and primary form building in order to kind of figure out how to draw a character like this. What that means is that we're going to start with some version of a head construction method like the Loomis method, where I'm thinking about where my center line is, I'm thinking about what the structure of the face is, I'm trying to define some dimensionality, and if I did need to add any rendering, that's really going to help me out when it comes to that. Maybe not what we're going to be doing here, which is just really what I call a super simple process, which is where we do a sketch, a construction phase, some finish lines, and then simple flat color. Nothing fancy, no trickery, just really, really basic art, focusing on building our skill for drawing and design and posing versus kind of using a million silly brushes and stuff. So the first thing is just proportion. Doesn't matter how good your drawing is, if you can get the head to the body, to the legs, to the arms, and you can make all of that kind of work, everything will tend to follow. And he's got his cool little staff. There's quite a few number of little cool details with the knots and things, which I feel like really make the character seem much more interesting. But this is often what I'm looking for when it comes to proportion, is just these sort of basic shapes here. Where do the hands come? Boom. Boom. And what happens there? Now, obviously, a huge part of this character is, you can kind of see, and this is how a lot of that sort of chibi art works, where you really are looking at a fairly standard body shape with a lot of iconography on top. a lot of big symbols, big shapes that tell you which character is one character and which character is another. So often we got this basic form that is a little bit like a baby's head, makes it super cute. And what I'm still doing in terms of thinking about where the proportion is of the eyes and all those other structures is I'm still finding center. I'm still trying to figure out, okay, here's where the nose would be, even though in this design, we're not really going to draw in a lot of dimensionality for the nose, right? In many cases, it's just looking at this little kind of shadowy shape. But this is going to help me find where those eyes could be and get me a decent start when it comes to thinking about where those proportions are. Now, this is the structural phase, so this may not exactly look like Goku. It's just going to look like a character with maybe too many lines on there, because one of the things that really defines a lot of manga symbology and iconography is the exact line, right? The exact place that you use and define the edge of the line, the start of the line, all those kind of little things. And often what we're doing when we're constructing is saying, well, this is generally where the eye shape is going to be. But the thing that will really make it look like the character or like a Toriyama drawing is to, define exactly which lines we choose to leave in when it comes to thinking about the eye. But in the construction phase, we obviously want to kind of put everything in. So that's basically a lot of what we're going to see with this character. Now, what I'll try and do is think about where that staff is going to come. And here we got on the left side, his right side. And this is where, if you've drawn Dragon Ball before, which I have not, never ever tried to draw Goku ever in my life. This is just me looking at Toriyama art. I used to draw a lot of stuff that looked like Toriyama art when I was sort of, in high school and stuff, but I never bothered to copy, those designs. It's just not something I'm super into. But it's always fun to actually figure out, like, okay, how did that work? But it looks like there's basically this mass on our right, or his left, and this mass on our left. And this group has three, generally speaking, 3 chunks of hair. And this one has 4. And that's it's just this kind of, looks like this sort of crazy mess of hair. But actually, it's not. And again, I think really understanding the iconography of where those shapes are is important, because you can see, I'm like, well, that's kind of where they go. But actually, probably starting with this top one is going to be the most important. All right. And I mean, one of the things that I guess everyone knows about Toriyama art and the whole Dragon Ball thing is similar to the way Miyazaki in a lot of his films, Hayao Miyazaki of Ghibli fame, the hair is often a major tell of the character's emotion. And so, when the character is very dynamic, the hair is often very dynamic. And when the character is more stationary, you can see the hair is a little bit more whimsical. So it's often a really good way to kind of just use that basic design to influence how the character feels. And it's these subtle things that we often miss when we're looking at design that I think can make a big difference. And he's got this cool little tail, right? Boom, 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 boom. So yeah, if you're a Dragon Ball fan, you're probably gonna look at what I'm doing and be like, this is not 100% accurate. This is not current lore. I'm probably going to make a bunch of mistakes. So I'm just coming at this from a drawing lesson perspective, and I'm learning just as much as anyone else would be about how to draw the character and how all that kind of stuff works. And I would recommend, no matter what kind of art you're into, that you really study these types of characters. And, if a character is a great design and it's very recognizable, especially the older ones, that have sort of maybe not as prevalent these days, go study those things. Go understand why they kind of work, right? So one of the things is, I'm like, how much does the hair overlap the eyes? That's always a really sort of important thing. And what you tend to find is that, you know, your tendencies as an artist mixed with the design are what's probably going to give it your take, right? If you do want to sort of draw a character like this and give it a unique take, versus if you want it to look exactly like the artist who drew it, it's all going to be about those real subtle things, like where you position the little bits of hair, how all that stuff works. And again, one of the reasons why this may look weird is because I'm adding a lot of this structure, but actually the character design is quite specific in the way that it defies structure in the hair and just treats it all as one black blob. Boom. So yeah, it's a pretty cool design. It's quite fun to draw. And this is something else that I would, I need to figure out what is happening with that. Right, with that this little thing. I think here we got a better view of it, right? So there's a little knot there. Then it comes round. Right, so there's a knot here. Boom. That's a really important part of the design. But yeah, I would say the number one reason that you should study great manga designs, great comic book designs, but especially great manga designs, is that they are often quite fun to draw, and people have refined them over the years and really made sure that the design is down to its most basic components. And it's something that if you are designing stuff and you're thinking about designing for video games, you're never really going to get this as an important distinction with your design, and that is that you must create a character that is fun to draw. If you don't create a character that is fun to draw, you will not have any fun as a comic book artist. As a proverbial mangaka, your life will be miserable. So I think studying great designs, like great superhero designs, your sort of Spider-Man. Spider-Man's quite complicated, but even, within all those sort of webs and things like that, there's a lot of kind of logic there. It does seem like these pants kind of end right a little bit above here. Well, they've got that really kind of pointy Toriyama vibe. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below how my Dragon Ball Z fan art is going. Normally on the channel, what we're about is you designing your own characters, you building your own worlds, you figuring out how to draw stuff from your imagination. The reason I often pick characters from popular culture is because then we can kind of draw the same thing. You kind of know where I'm going with it. It's a bit less, sort of based on my style. So I feel like they are actually really good for doing drawing demonstrations. But yeah, the goal is that if you want to do fan art, you just got to realize that's going to teach you how to do fan art. It'll never teach you how to design your own characters, how to draw from your imagination. The same way if you're copying from reference, that'll teach you how to copy from reference. It won't teach you how to draw your own thing. So we are what we repeatedly do. Anyway, that's like, it's kind of close, right? It's got a little Goku guy there. I mean, it's not a Dragon Ball Z character. Cool. So let's have a quick look at that art book. This is Akira Toriyama, The World. And this is one of those classic old art books. This is my original copy. And I think this is just a really good example of demonstrating how good Toriyama was. Again, the late Akira Toriyama. The one thing that I really took away from Toriyama's work, and this is one of these really ironic things, is that obviously this style, this Dragon Ball Z style, has become emblematic of what manga means to a Western audience. And it does embody a lot of the, typical stylistic, iconic things about manga, but it's funny that people often don't appreciate how good Akira Toriyama was as a draftsperson. And the technical ability was really next level. So it's kind of always funny that people copy and do that kind of manga style, and that so many art school teachers and people were really kind of negative about it. When if you actually were to kind of say that studying Toriyama is a great thing to do as an artist, and quite a challenging thing to do to get as good as he was at drawing. And the thing that really kind of struck me was how often, like, this anatomy that I feel like Toriyama is so well known for, that sort of Dragon Ball, really kind of clunky, chunky kind of anatomy, it is actually, there is a lot of sort of purpose to why you would kind of do that. And I feel like it does have a really sort of effective style, keeps all of the shapes of the limbs very simple, but, you still kind of have some idea that this is a bicep, this is a deltoid, etc. And also the great mix of simplification of a lot of those anatomical forms with good articulation, good proportion, good kind of sense of solidarity. So I think it's a great example of someone who studied anatomy in a really good way and applied it in a really effective way. And you can see that there's all these details that really make these drawings, the little designs of everything. It's just next level. All of the guns, all of the cars, all of the mechanical stuff is often drawn really well. It's referenced, and I think you really have to appreciate that. Is often why I think people respond to the work so well, is the characters themselves are quite simplistic, the faces are quite simplistic, but they're very visually appealing, and everything else is drawn really, really nicely. And one of the things that I guess it speaks to when I think about sort of drawing advice, or people kind of wondering, how should I learn anatomy? What should I do? Is that every artist applies anatomy in a very different way. So we can all understand the same foundation of there being different muscles, a deltoid, a bicep, you've got your forearm muscles, etc. But the way that you kind of apply it and make it into a living, breathing world is very different. And at its core, the most important thing, if you're studying anatomy and wanting to stylize it, is to understand and learn proportion. The proportion, I think, is the thing that really glues a lot of Toriyama's work together. Everything is very well structured, very solid proportion. The characters often feel as if they have solid, consistent proportions, even though often the bicep and the deltoid is not that well articulated. But you can tell that the artist has a really strong understanding of, realistic anatomy. They're just applying it, and they're practicing it in a different way. And I think that's the number one thing to take away from someone like the late Toriyama, because it kind of unfortunately got lumped in with a lot of kind of bad anime and manga drawing. But I think anyone who knows Akira Toriyama understands that they have an insanely high level of drawing craft. And it can often be hard to articulate that. But the reality is that you can see, if you sort of look at a lot of the more detailed and kind of like stronger muscular characters, that the knowledge of anatomy was all there. It just often wasn't sort of fully articulated. And especially when you sort of look at the anime, that's often other artists sort of drawing and stuff. But that's often what's missing, is that an artist is purposefully simplifying and making things look visually appealing, despite them, often knowing all the muscles and all the things that sort of go in there. Yeah, it's all about sort of appeal and using a detailed anatomical study and knowledge to create the art that you want. So a good way of thinking about that, again, is that we all learn the same sort of foundation, but we apply it in very different ways. And it means that one of the things I think you should do, if you do want to create a more stylized anatomical look, is practice drawing the way that you want in the beginning. We don't need to necessarily be studying anatomy in charcoal from sort of life models, but obviously the more anatomy you kind of know, the better. So I really, really like this book, because I feel like it was one of the first times that I saw that an artist could kind of have flexibility like this. And I really liked how Toriyama would create these really simple flat colors. And also all of his art was kind of relatively flat, but also there was this ability to kind of render things. And so it kind of really told me, oh, he's doing this for a choice. And some of these drawings are just so great, like just classic flat color, great drawing, great characters. Some of it was much more rendered, right? Much more detailed. And, and then I think I always liked at the end of this book, just had this kind of dragon. And I would just remember looking at all the scales and thinking, well, why didn't he do that with everything? But this is why style is so important, and understanding how to sort of represent the world differently is so important. So one of the things that I kind of want to, I guess, play around with and look at is how we sort of use a very simple process to create an illustration. So this is what we're going to be doing, is looking at how we can maybe break down this character a little bit more, how we can pose it, and then at the end, how we can maybe create a little bit of a finished drawing that has some color. Let's switch over to the feed of the computer so we can actually kind of see this a little bit clearer. And what we're going to try and do is just look at how to break down this form. So once you kind of studied something, if you want to kind of be drawing it multiple times, it's a matter of thinking about it in a relatively structural way and figuring out how to make it fit with your kind of drawing system. So what we're going to do is just think about trying to take these proportions, think about posing the character. And then we'll see if we can come up with a number of little sort of poses or something. So still here, I often find that I kind of draw what I imagine is the head, and then when I realize how big the hair actually needs to be on top of that, it's always pretty crazy. But the way I sort of like to think of this is to break it down. Let's see if we can draw it with the staff. It's really just with these small characters, it's so important to have the jelly beans, right? These little kind of jelly beans of the torso, but also the jelly beans and the little kind of overlapping spheres of the arms, right? And the hands and all of this, because everything's so compact. Often what we're dealing with is really just simple shapes that are overlapping, and thinking about having basic shapes that overlap is one of the fundamental aspects of art. This is what's going to give you the sense of there being dimensionality. It's just thinking about these big shapes overlapping each other, trying to find dimensionality within them. Right? And just playing around with these. You could think about having some sense of a mannequin underneath, but because there's not as much of a structural skeleton for these really cartoony characters, I find that it's kind of less important. And what that means is that if we're drawing a large character that has more typical anatomical structure, right? Well, like a normal sort of anatomical feature. Like part of what we're often doing is trying to figure out proportions of the links of things, and trying to think about the perspective of all these kind of different bits. When we're drawing these, this is what I find, is when we're drawing these littler characters, this is what I learned drawing my sort of little Pinocchio character, which is based on the same kind of proportional style. right? So this is kind of Pinocchio. Similar kind of overall chibi style look to someone like Goku, except Pinocchio is three heads high, right? So he kind of has, here's the body, here's the legs, he's about there. Right, so he's sort of like this. Is that, you know, it really is, even with Pinocchio, he is this kind of skeleton, right? But you're kind of better off really thinking about these shapes as if they are jelly beans. Once you have a character like this that kind of actually has that kind of mass to them, because that's where you're going to get that sort of real sense of overlap and get to sort of space out the drawing. So, you know, even when I was drawing Pinocchio, often what I was trying to do was get away from that skeletal kind of anatomy. But this is how you would do it, right? If you actually had like a mannequin like Pinocchio, where the character is literally a puppet. Right? Is we would try and draw all of those different muscles as if they were little sort of bits of wood, which is what they were. Right? And the finishing of that is just to imagine that everything is just a little plank of wood. But with these kind of chibi characters, where you can see, let's get rid of that. You can see that they kind of have these large shapes that overlap each other. I find that often the skeleton kind of just gets in the way. You can be much more effective by thinking about the jelly bean shape of where everything goes. And this really brings us back to more of that kind of Disney style of animation, that kind of simplified look where we are really trying to simplify these shapes. This is at least is how I try and think about this type of character. Right. Right. Boom. Eye here, eye here. All right, nose shape here. Oh, this is where he'd have his big kind of grin or something like that. So this is where, depending on what you're doing, right, your initial sort of approach and what you're kind of looking for might change. If I'm drawing something that is more like a traditional mannequin or like Pinocchio, then I'm going to think about those kind of structures. I'm going to think about the mannequin. I'm going to think about the skeleton. But I think what you find is there's not quite the same amount of proportion to sort of figure out. And the most important thing to look at with a stylized character like this that has that compact frame is these little jelly beans, right? It's this overlap of thinking about the forearm as one shape, the hand as one shape, the upper arm as one shape, right? And then to think about how they overlap, right? Torso is kind of one shape. Pelvis is maybe one shape. It's good to kind of articulate that. But what you kind of tend to find is that a lot of that anatomy isn't that well defined. What we want to do is prioritize these kind of lines of action, right? Making sure that things feel kind of smooth. And that we're spacing things out. That's at least my insight when it comes to drawing simpler characters. I'm trying to think about those poses. It is much more about line of action. It is much more about the jelly bean, and structure is really defined by thinking about spherical kind of jelly bean style shapes that kind of overlap each other. And once you kind of have that, then you can quite easily go in there and sort of define those out. Too much structure here often ruins your kind of line of action. So you do have to be careful. Boom, boom. So let's see if we can, again, ideate a couple of poses. Maybe look at some cool action poses for this. Right, like what would be a good view for this? So here we go. I feel like something kind of action-packed, something classic is sort of what I'm thinking. And depends what you want to do in terms of the pose, whether you want to sort of start with the head, whether you want to start with the body. But yeah, what I'm always trying to do is find these kind of spheres, right? Trying to define that dimension and try and find some cool sort of shapes. And once I kind of have that feeling of here's the dimensionality, everything becomes a lot easier. And again, doesn't have to be a crazy, interesting, sort of super dynamic pose. Doesn't have to be something sort of unique. But yeah, this is where thumbnails can be so important. All right, so we've got some of that dimensionality. And as we kind of refine the face, right, as we sort of refine some of that proportion, this is where you can really think about, okay, where are all these different masses of that face going? Right, where? And have fun, right? Be loose, be structural. So much of learning to add structure or dimensionality to these types of cartoony drawings is understanding how to get those sort of primary forms and understand sort of what to build, how to start, how to finish. I feel like it would be cool to add, again, get this pose here. Right. So we got a hand down here. Something like that. And again, we've got to watch our tangents, making sure as we create a little pose here. This is where, again, center line. Find the kind of motion of that hair. Again, I feel like it's good that those kind of big shapes tend to flow from the line of the face a little bit. So here I got my torso. Here I'm going to have my belt. This is where, again, drawing through. Yeah, we're drawing cartoony characters. Yes, we still need to draw through. Yes, we still need to find out and think about what's the dimensionality of the torso relative to the head. All right. What is happening here? Here we got this. Again, let's think about the jelly beans here. Right. Jelly beans here. I feel like this hand is going to be a huge pain because it's sort of twisting in a weird way. Boom. All right. Now, thinking about what we do with this leg. All right. It's just a matter of trying to create a decent tangent with it. And we can also think about where the ground plane is. All right, maybe we should think about trying to pull that little line there, something like this. All right, almost kind of we're looking down on the character. Boom. And yeah, I'm not sure whether he still has that holder thing on the back. So yeah, got to make sure we focus on tangents, good tangents, bad tangents. A tangent is basically just where I'm going to have one sort of body part interact and kind of mess with another one, right? And so often you can run into big trouble when we just kind of have a bit of an awkward pose, right? And you can often spend a lot of time doing that. Let's see how we can move this down. See what we can get. I mean, I feel like this is kind of a cool pose. Trick is, can we get that foreshortening right? And am I going to spend ages on this hand and get into hand purgatory? Right, because it's kind of sort of be like this. Anyway, let's have a go. So here, I think we've probably got, and this is where I'm like, oh, are we going to run into problems with our tangents? I feel like there's another bit of hair there. Right, I got that. We got our biggest bit of kind of hair here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then on this one, again, we sort of got 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So we're lots and lots of different ways that this could go wrong. But that's why when it comes to a simple, reliable process and it comes to thinking about what you should focus on, what we're going to do is break down this posing and thinking about what a cool picture would be from the actual kind of drawing, right? So this is still our little thumbnail. And it's cool because we can separate out thinking about this from actually drawing it and me figuring out the hand and stuff. And this is often the difference between, your work looking professional and not, is that drawing is not one step, it's multiple steps. And all we need to do in order to solve a lot of those anatomical problems and play around with the tangents and sort of adjust that and tweak that, make it better, make it more solid, is to add a second little step there. So let's look at finishing up this pose and then thinking about, okay, how can I make this better? I kind of still want to show, I feel like I still want to show that. I'm just swimming in bad tangents, which is often what happens with these kind of little chibi characters. Right, and then we got the tail. Where does the tail go? Let's get rid of this silly arrow. Right. Again, can we create some cool movement? Tail is going there. Think about some kind of abstract shadow pattern. Whoop. Cool. All right. Sketch done. Let's see whether we can apply a simple, reliable process to this to make sure that a lot of my questions here, and this is often the challenge, is like I can come up with a pose, but can I actually execute it? Can I finish it? And what you want there is a simple, reliable way of getting from A to B. So what we'll do, we'll keep all of this here. I will clean up some of it. Let's get rid of this stuff that doesn't really belong. We'll take this, and I'm just going to keep it a very similar size. I'm going to go Control J. We are in Photoshop. Hit V for move. Control T for transform, and let's make it a little bit bigger. Let's give ourselves a little bit more chance here to do something cool. All right. What we're going to do is just reduce the opacity of this. And then what this does is like we can still see it. It's still there, but I'm just going to have another go at it. All right, let's make a new layer. Here we go. New layer. All right. And what I'll actually do is pick a slightly bigger brush, and I'm going to redefine and rethink about where that structure is. Now, this is, I think, often where, like when I was starting out, when I was not drawing Dragon Ball Z, but when I was thinking about how to get good as an artist and how to think about drawing better, and I would be looking at stuff like Toriyama, looking at all these sort of different things and not really knowing how to improve my drawing. Often what I'd be trying to do is skip this step that I'm doing here, because I feel like I've already drawn this thing. I don't want to be doing it again. It's not fair. This is boring. But often what you find is as you practice, your ability to add more construction passes and add this section here, which is the magical drawing pass, what you kind of find is it actually goes pretty quickly. And that really is the secret to it, is once we think about the pose, now I'm not going to worry about the pose again. What I'm going to do is think about structure, solidarity. I'm going to find a lot of that dimension I'm thinking about, and we could imagine a lot of the cross contour lines here. I'm going to try and think about getting right this. Let's think about where those teeth would be. Like this doesn't matter at all. And a lot of Dragon Ball kind of teeth and a lot of anime teeth in general, like, you know, it doesn't really matter whether the teeth are actually in a reasonable position, but I'm gonna do it anyway. And also here I can think about adding in those sort of eyebrows and kind of actually where all of that structure might be. And I'm gonna, again, I've sort of already made this. Let's see, maybe I'll make this a bit smaller. See if I can really match what I kind of had there. Right, let's make this skull even bigger. Right, and let's think about this form under here. Right, got the torso form. Got this shoulder. And what I'm going to do is start with, this is a really important sort of trick. I'm going to start with the hands, right? Like, where are the hands in general? We don't have to draw them all fancy. It doesn't have to be amazing, but like, where are those hands? And then I'm going to work backwards, because often when we're thinking about three-dimensional space, that's kind of how it works anyway, is we're looking at the thing that is sort of foreshortened, and then I'm drawing the thing that's behind it, and then I'm trying to link it up. And I'm sort of imagining that I have these structures. If I was to draw contour lines, if I was to master the kind of toilet roll here, this is what I'd be getting. And I'm trying to think about, now that I've got that massive sphere, that's this sort of blob that's defining the hand, what I'm going to do is see if I can draw one of these little fingers here. And again, what I'm doing with the finger is just drawing one blob, another blob. I think drawing three fingers is a really good idea for your character designs. Makes things super simple. There's always room for 3 fingers. So you can see here again, like that's kind of going to be right. It's kind of not going to be right. Let's now rotate it. And what I'm going to do is see if I can draw this through here. And I'll probably have to expand this a little bit so it kind of fits. And this is not necessarily like how you draw the best hands, right? It's not how you draw the most solid hands. And I'm actually going to give this staff a little bit of a attitude. We're going to give it a little bit of a tweak. Right. But it's also going to be getting smaller. Something like that should be good, maybe. I feel like it could be getting even smaller here. Let's cheat, because we can in Photoshop, and I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. Control T, I'll select the middle. Right, just kind of make that a bit bigger, or sort of push that foreshortening. I think it's good to practice not doing that, because you will improve your ability to kind of get it right on the first go, but trying to go fast. And that is honestly often what I'll do if it's, if I find that something just is not quite the right size. Right. I'm going to really try and push the foreshortening of this back here. And I feel like this probably needs to extend up a bit. All right, we're thinking about elliptical anatomy, right? And I'll see if I can true this up in a bit, right? But we're thinking about where's the center of that. I'm drawing ellipses so that they are symmetrical there. So again, I can come through and have another pass at that if I want. I think that might kind of be okay. Let's have another go at this hand. Got this one. knuckles there. Can I define some of those knuckles? Again, this is going to be a little bit kind of mushy fingers. And again, I got to try and make sure as well that we keep them simple. Boom. All right, let's follow this around. All right, because where's this? This structure is here. Now let's think about carrying our dimension of this shoulder over here. So I'm going to have a shoulder here, kind of draw through, make sure I draw this shoulder here. Now it may be pulled back, right? But it's really good to put it in there anyway, define that shoulder. And here I've got this hand. Now I can more accurately draw this hand, because I know that we're kind of looking down at it. If we're looking down at it, it's basically a cylinder. Let's see how we go. Again, probably going to end up with some banana fingery kind of things here. Let's see how we go. All right, we got this thumb here. So I'm probably adding a little bit more structure than I need to these hands. All right, probably should keep them as jelly beany as possible. All right, so we can also trace the line of these clothes around the character. Let's think about dimensionality of that forearm. Yeah, and in this case, I think we need to make this hand a lot smaller. So let's make that a little bit smaller. Or let's try the other way. Let's try it in the, let's get rid of it and try again. Now that we've figured that out, it's not any harder to redraw something than it is to draw it the first time. So maybe what I should do is try that. With this one, we kind of moved it around. With this one, let's see if we can simplify the hand a little bit more, get that jelly bean action going. Right. Is that knuckle? This one's wrapping around. All right, this arm is going this way into space. Right, so if we think about the toilet roll theory, right, this one's going down, and then this is coming kind of at us. Boom, boom. So that's sort of what we're trying to do. All right. Yeah, adding too much anatomy to any of these things is going to be a pretty kind of critical error. All right. Now let's think about minding our tangents. So here I've got this hair, and what I'm going to do here is really think about the micro composition of where these hair bits go, because I need to make sure that my hand and the hair stay separate. So we got this. All right, that. Oh. This eyebrow needs to come up. So it's very easy when you're doing these things to be looking at it and second guess yourself, which is often what I do, especially when I'm doing demos and kind of trying to make this up on the fly. And think, oh, like this doesn't look like the character. Often with construction phase, you kind of have to trust the process of your construction and really finesse your understanding of what is going to happen at what stage, right? So here I'm going to get, again, see if I can get the micro composition here. I want this arm here, and I want this shoulder to just be slightly separate from the hand. And these are the things that will make your art feel a little bit more professional. All right, it's just trying to say I've got this one line here, right? These aren't all sort of mushing together. And I think that's kind of really, really important to pay attention to. Let's flip our canvas and see how we go here, whether or not we are still feeling kind of as dimensional as we could. All right, got my hand here, knuckle. So got knuckle there, finger. Right, finger. I've only got, there's like maybe another finger under there. I can't see. Maybe I should have my kind of other finger here. It's going to be too many fingers. But I think that's probably also what we kind of want to get that kind of overlap and a bit more variety. Right, and that way we're not trying to fit in too many fingers down there. Let's think about where that fingernail is. Where this is. Dimension. Right, and also let's try and see if we can keep those hands nice and simple. Again, when in doubt, I'm often trying to just look at what is a cool jelly bean shape. Right, and again, here's the thumb kind of wrapping around. Now this hand again is getting a little bit sort of large, right? It's kind of almost as big as that one. But yeah, we'll see what happens when I kind of actually draw it. Again, they feel way too realistic. Boom. Let's see how we go. He's got those little cool, handy bracelets that we can always use. So yeah, I feel like here dimensionally, his head is looking a little bit tucked in. So we can probably move it over here actually, and I think it'll appear a little bit better. And one of the things I find is, you know, the more you know a character, the more you kind of get used to adding all the bits and pieces, the easier it'll be for you to get all that stuff kind of right the first time and make sure that it all kind of looks good. All right. And I know we've got this rope that goes around here. Now, this was a tricky tangent as well. Like, where do we put the rope? Rope kind of goes... Let's look at the reference. Where does the rope go? Rope goes just below that and comes basically all the way down to that belt. So yeah, we're going to have to think about where that goes. It goes under there, and that's going to just come here. So it's like, look, that tangent is never going to look that great. But let's make sure, again, we either want this rope tangent to be here, so it's separated from these, or I want it to kind of go under here. Not quite sure which should be better. I think this is going to work. Make it a bit chunkier. Make it come down there. And then we're going to have the knot. Nice little kind of flying knot for that. And also for the belt. Let's think about where under there the arm goes. Boom. So you can see again, like one of the things that I think is really important to get your head around, if you're sort of at that kind of stage where you're thinking about drawing, trying to figure these things out, is that you're much better off spending your time here, learning to construct, learning to draw properly, and get that kind of structure there, than you are trying to get really clean lines, or trying to worry about like why does this stuff not feel solid, or why doesn't the character look like they should, or why do you always end up with bad tangents? All those things are really solved here, and if we can think about how to kind of add them here, everything becomes a lot easier. All right, so I got my one big hair thing there, got another big hair thing there. Right, and then I'll double check the hair iconography later. Because again, it's surprising. It seems really simple, but I was kind of noticing that so often, yeah, just getting it even a little bit wrong looks a lot wrong. Right, so here again, let's think about what's going on with this hair. He kind of has a bit of this like part here. All right. Gotta get the full egg shape with this head. But the good thing about working this way and having I guess a much more sort of solid process, again, this hair is not quite vibing yet. I'm going to play around with it in a little bit. The good thing about having a really kind of solid process for this is that once you sort of sort this out, probably could just see whether that needs to be smaller. The rest of it is really clean sailing, right? It becomes a lot easier, right? So everything else becomes very cruisy. If you have things selected by this and you've just moved it, you can use often the lasso tool will sometimes yeah, delete it, but it's got to actually be in sequence. All right, so here we've got our leg. Pointy Toriyama foot. See if we can get these different elements to kind of flow around a bit, create some interesting shapes. This one here with the knot is not going to do that for us. But we can probably make it feel a little bit dynamic. Should we, again, maybe I should have this one on this side. Just create a little bit more dynamism. I feel like, again, the structure here is still not watertight. Still got to do a little bit. But we're getting there. All right, I'm going to have a go at this face. And because I've flipped it, now I'm going to be able to see a lot of those kind of inaccuracies that I was dealing with before. We can really have a go at sort of fixing them. And again, what I'm going to do here is kind of think about where is the structure for that nose. But when we're kind of coming to draw it in, we can be a lot more simplified. Same thing with this mouth, right? But exactly a lot of these features here, these are going to be very indicative of how much it feels like Toriyama's work. If I, use my symbolism and iconography for a face, right, it's going to look a lot like my sort of stylization. If I really use, exactly the shapes and icons that he uses, that's where it's going to look much more like his. I think one of the things I want to do is make these bits of hair far more Toriyama, right? I'm going to tend to add a little bit more sort of life to them in terms of more wobble. But I think, let's go look at our reference. Let's flip back. Now, yeah. So you can see again, when he's sort of like in this action mode, right, the hair, right, I feel like often has slightly more dynamic look. Oh. So I gotta always remember to use not my hairstyle. Like, is that right? Kind of. I feel like this could go up a little bit. So instead of moving it, let's try just redrawing it. I think that can often be far, far more effective. There we go. And it could just be that, like I was sort of saying when we were sketching, that we just need to remove any of the sense of form or overlap from this and just get ourselves back to that iconic look for the hair. So if you use the structure to think about where hair goes and where the form is and, you know, where the ears are and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes down to it, what we're trying to get is just that kind of pure black shape. And that's what will kind of give us the look. You can see though in that art book that there are some sort of examples of the character being sort of rendered, and he does actually put in sort of sketchy lines and gives it some dimension. But yeah, in most cases, just simple, flat. All right. That's probably all we have time for with this kind of construction drawing. How long has this taken? Half an hour. Way too long in my opinion. But I think now we've got a really good understanding of the character and sort of structure. And what we can do now is I'll put in, again, sort of a rough organic shape here that might kind of help us in the future, but I think I'm just going to render it clean. Yeah, so again, we've done one pass, and now I can get rid of that, and I've got basically a very simple set of finished pencils. What I'm going to do now is, you guessed it, we are just going to take this and see whether we can do some finished lines. And that'll be pretty simple because we've already figured everything out. A lot of what will help you when it comes to inking and line work is just to make sure that you have already handled your drawing. If I know that I've already handled the drawing elements of this, the rest is me basically just connecting the dots. It's just paint by numbers. It's all been done. Now, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to render this, but I'm going to use, I think, a bit of a sort of textured look, similar to some Toriyama work that you may have kind of seen in that art book, where we are using some texture to help us define some of the form, add a little bit of some nuance to it. Certainly using my weird way of drawing ears there. Boom. But I'm not quite sure how I'm going to handle the flatness of the hair. So we'll see. This may be something where what I kind of have in mind won't work. Because normally when I'm thinking about hair, I am adding in dimensionality, right? I would always be thinking about which of these large bits of hair is in front of which. And I don't know whether that is defined within the design. Right, boom. Again, now that I've done this, I understand way more about the design. I understand way more about Toriyama's art. And I think this is where, we often talk about in traditional art practice, the idea of doing a master study. And this is where I'd say, yeah, do a master study of a character design, right? Like take one of these designs and pick something that is good that maybe is not something you would normally stylistically create, and see if you can break it down, see if you can study it, see if you can understand how it looks the way it does. We're not drawing fan art for the sake of fan art. What we're doing is studying what makes this stuff work. And I think that's where you're going to find the real value in it. I think maybe I'm going to make this bit of hair go in front of this bit of hair. So I'm sitting here and I'm going to try and make sure I understand what hair goes in front of what. I don't know whether this will probably totally backfire. Boom, 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 boom. And if you're experimenting with style like this, one of the things you can do, especially with line work, and this is what I often recommend to students, is focus on making sure that you experiment on different layers. So think about like adding the rendering for your character on a different layer. You know, like add a bit more texture, add a bit more something, you know, add a bit more shading, add a bit more dimensionality. And, you know, then you'll kind of get a feel for turning it on, turning it off, like what actually works in the finish. And once you've sort of done that a couple of times, you'll have a really good understanding of how to kind of get your style to function. But again, I'm kind of making this up. All right. I'm going to put in these eyeballs first. And one of the things, again, about that sort of Toriyama art is we often have, this is my layperson's understanding of it. All right, let's see if we can go back and look at some actual reference. But yeah, we're often drawing like this side of the eye and that side of the eye, and then the eyebrow kind of cuts it off. But also frequently we leave things so that, you know, maybe the top of the eye is drawn a little bit less. Yeah, it's always sort of really interesting how that kind of works. So the way it kind of looks to me is that, let's make this a bit smaller. And studying how different artists create eyes, I think is super valuable because it's such an important aspect of style. But yeah, it kind of seems like, yeah, there is actually this pretty round vibe here. I think this needs to come here. And it's cut off by these big, chunky eyebrows. Let's check again. What are the shape? Yeah, they kind of go like up, like a big shape like that. Super interesting. I think that is definitely, again, based on the way I've drawn this, that's going to be tricky because I'm using this motion like that out there. So I'm going to have to change direction. I'm not sure how that is going to work. Let's erase this a little bit. Put in some of that texture here. What's kind of happened? I feel like I have, at some point there, in that process, the pencil has gotten way smaller for some reason. Let's go back. Yeah, it's there. Yeah, over here. That's totally messing everything up. And again, I can't undo those crazy eyebrows. Let's see whether that is going to do it or not. Let me know in the comments whether oh, that's a cool look, or you have ruined the whole point of the character. All right, adding this scumbling, messy texture. It's kind of meant to look as if we, kind of just did it in a school book, right? Often with this, when I'm sort of filling in this stuff with texture, I am kind of thinking about making it a little bit rough, kind of on purpose. I never want to try and make it look too clean or too perfect. Because I find, again, it often, it just kind of looks a bit too clean. Boom. Drawing hair. How do these things blend, right? So here's where I could think about trying to consider and contemplate like how some of these elements are kind of moving in front of or behind each other, or like, I don't know. It's hard to know whether or not that's going to, again, come back to bite me or not. Keep it dark. Keep it dark. Keep it dark. Boom. Here we go. Oh. All right. Yeah, let's see whether that works. All right, let's do the nose. Again, is this a good... It's probably not a Toriyama nose. That's like me using the sort of style that I would normally do for a nose. Again, same with the teeth. Yeah, so I mean, personally, I don't really do fan art outside of drawing kind of lessons and things. Because again, I find it's a good way to draw something that, we all kind of understand. I'd sort of often do this as drawing demos, draw like Naruto characters, all sorts of things. But for my art, like I have almost no interest at all in doing anything like that. Just never been something I'm interested in. So for me, this is always really interesting and sort of unique. Well, all right, let's organize things a little bit more. Let's start from the foreground. So when we're inking or doing final lines or whatever you kind of want to call it, one of the things that we sort of try and do is always start from our kind of foreground, because that means I'm drawing the things that are coming forward in like sort of first, and it just tends to make everything kind of flow and work a little bit better. Boom. All right. Now I've got this. Draw that line. Let's see if I can draw this line. All right. Draw this one over here. All right. Draw that armband. Let's make it stick out a little bit. All right, give that a little bit of dimensionality. All right, put some shadow here. See if we can give this dimension, this rope, a bit of dimension there, but without like sort of drawing it all. So it can be a lot easier. Like if you kind of construct it, then it's a lot easier for me to just kind of suggest those things. Whereas if I was to go and try and draw this for the first time, the rope, I'd probably be like so focused on trying to get each rope knot to kind of look proper that, yeah, I'd probably mess up and not focus too much on how it would be drawn. So same thing here, right? Probably just... And you could certainly just draw those as flat, kind of wormy cylinders and forget about the rest. That would be fine as well. Oh. Let's maybe I'll keep that. I'll keep that. We won't put any shadows in the art. Boom, boom, boom. 1, 2, 3. All right, let's see if I can draw these fingers. Man, this Huion pen keeps drawing a line, breaking me out of that. Boom, boom. So again, this is, I would say this hand is the weakest bit of the whole drawing, which is kind of funny because I thought that other hand would be the sort of weakest bit. But I think this one is the least sort of structurally sound, kind of blobby hand there. But it, outside of it being a drawing demo, that is probably not going to matter in terms of anyone looking at it and caring too much. So one thing I probably will do is like, I'm going to lean into my style of doing clothing and stuff. So I'm not going to use the classic sort of Toriyama jagged sort of Japanese sume style of clothing. Which I think is like a really cool sort of aspect of that, but I'm going to make this a bit more rounded. And let me know whether that ruins everything or whether it is a unique stylistic affectation that has some value. One, 2, 3. All right, almost there. What we'll do after this is just add some super simple color and we'll see how it kind of all comes together. And I think this is the whole point, is that, if we just spend a little bit of time here, we can come along, create something that feels relatively polished. All right, now I got this bracelet here. Boom, boom. Maybe a shadow there. I don't know. Maybe not. All right. Now, this is where like you can really regret not putting in a little bit more effort with things like the shoes. I didn't really figure out what was going on there. Oh, well, radiating pinch point of our drapery. It's always important to pay attention to. Boom. Okay. Simple triangle feet. I think Toriyama or Liefeld were onto something. No one really cares about feet or buildings. They just want to see cool stuff. All right. Let me see if I can render this, because it is a kind of a monkey tail, I think. Let's see, moving around so I can see if I can get some of this line going. If we can add a little bit of texture there, that'll probably go a long way. And these are other little effects that, you know, as you draw, you get sort of more used to saying, how do I, you know, break up that line? How do I make that feel more like fur or cloth or whatever? I had to draw quite a few animal characters when I was drawing my Pinocchio comic. I've had to design quite a few animal characters for various animation pitches and sort of shows and stuff. So yeah, I kind of have a in my brain as, oh yeah, if it was a tail like that, that's kind of what we would do. So yeah, I think we should fully separate this head. Boom. Go. And what I'm going to do now is just go around and plus this, right? So we just want to see if we can put it on the other screen, and you can have a look at the actual, I guess, line work that we were working on, right? And I'm pretty sure that this is not, I think, again, I haven't looked enough into the reference to be like, is this a wooden staff? I don't think it is. Or at least it's not like explicitly kind of wood. I'm just putting a bit of that sort of texture on it to make it feel sort of interesting. All right. I think that's it. I think we run out of time. Cool. So what we're going to do now is just use two tricks. We're going to create really simple sepia lines for this, and then we're going to add some really, really basic flat color. And that should finish this off and give us a nice, really simple, reliable way of creating a comic book illustration. If we're thinking about different ways to add sepia lines, normally what I'm going to be doing, let's see if we can go over to this one. Normally what I'm going to do is just hit my automatic sepia lines thing. And if you download the quick start guide that I kind of talked about in the beginning of this video, you'll be able to get a PSD that kind of has all that. But there are some really simpler ways of doing this, and I've sort of talked about those on the channel before as well. So we're going to create a white layer. I'm going to clip by holding Alt on Windows between the lines layer and the white layer. I'm going to then make a new layer, and I have a keyboard shortcut to do it, or you can just hit that button there. And what I'm going to do here is set that to overlay, blending mode, and I'm going to fill it with an orange color. I'll kind of show what that would look like. I'm going to hit Alt backspace, which should, fill. And so that's going to give me a really, really basic way of kind of getting a nice sort of sepia color. And then if I want to sort of change those lines, I can sort of tweak that and play around with it, make it sort of darker, brighter. I can make it more saturated. I can make it more red, more orange, right? Like whatever we want. And there's often, again, like a nice little kind of middle ground that you might find. You can then play around with different ways to sort of tweak that. I could put the lines over the top, right, just as dark. I could kind of put them there. I could, again, darken up the lines like this. Let's play around with that. But for now, I think I'll just double up the lines, which is a really easy way. So I've just duplicated the lines layer in that stack. Right, there's the lines. I've just duplicated them. You can do that by just Alt dragging up or down. That'll kind of duplicate the layer. And there we go. So what I'm going to do next is really simple. I'm going to hit Shift B, which is going to give me my pencil tool. And then I'm going to do the flatting for this with the simplest of tools, which is the pencil tool in Photoshop. Let's see, like, oh, here we go. Set that one to multiply, obviously. Set the white layer to multiply, otherwise none of that will work. You can use selection tools, and in a lot of the other kind of tutorials where I'm doing a big illustration and I got maybe half an hour of this to go, I will use as many selections and cheaty things as I possibly can. But here, I'm just going to use this. I would say one of the most overrated skills you can build is just hand-eye coordination. Often people are worrying, oh, I can't draw this, I can't draw that. A lot of it starts with very basic hand-eye coordination. And where a lot of that starts is doing boring stuff like this. So I would actually say, even if like AI came out with a really good way to auto flat or auto do the selections, or as I often do, I now flat most of the comics using some pretty sort of hacky automated layer selection techniques, and I'm often sort of hacking Photoshop to create custom actions and things that will kind of make this simpler. I probably flatted my entire first comic book project, which was 62 pages, and all of the pencils and the final lines were kind of done in pencil on traditional paper. And I scanned it in, and I had to hand flat it. And I did exactly what I'm doing here, where every character and everything I had to go through in a really boring way, excruciatingly boring. I had to go through and get this right. But what you do is you kind of get good at doing exactly not what I just did there, which is that you get, like, I don't want to go over, I want to make sure that I hit this in the middle of this line. And so what I'm doing is, I'm practicing holding pressure at a particular level, and then when I want to go bigger, I'm practicing holding it. And this is exactly the skill that you need if you want to get good at art, is getting very good at controlling the pressure sensitivity. Now, not just like, oh, I can make a nice mark, but, can I keep the same pressure for a long period of time, right? And like, oh, let's make it a little bit more. Can I keep that consistently? And once you kind of understand this, it makes a lot of the basic hand-eye coordination that you're developing pretty simple. A really basic idea, but often I feel like in the beginning we're just so wanting to skip boring bits. Don't skip boring bits. The two most powerful reasons that you should do boring flatting if you're doing comics is, firstly, it gives you a really good thing to warm up with. So in the beginning of the day, I would often find that really doing this work was a saving grace, because I'd wake up, and especially if you haven't drawn for a couple of days, you kind of don't have anything sorted in terms of your normal hand-eye coordination. Everything's often a little bit stiff. The earlier you are in your art journey, the more likely that is to be true. And you can do warm-up sketches and stuff, but one of the things that you can do that is very brainless and very low pressure, which I think is really important, is flatting. And so I found if I kind of got up in the morning and I know I hadn't drawn a bit, that I could just do half an hour of this or an hour of this, and basically you're tracing. You're trying to trace and think about how to get a particular line and how to do it once and how to get close to that edge. And it just builds really, really strong basic core drawing muscles. Because you're also, if you're struggling to get good at using a digital tablet, this will dial in your understanding of the pressure curve perfectly. So I really recommend this, that it will warm you up and get you kind of at peak drawing ability. Just because you're going to figure out, you're going to shake out all the cobwebs. You're going to really figure out, are you sitting right? Is something wrong? Is your Wacom or Huion or XP Pen tablet broken? What's going on? And once you kind of figure all those things out and you can get these lines right, yeah, it's going to, then I've done some actual work, some useful stuff, worked on my art, but nothing that's going to make or break. And, all of this is stuff where when you get it wrong, you just undo it and start again. It doesn't matter. So I would say, yeah, it's a good way to warm up. And it's also a good way just as pure drawing. I would say, like, even if you don't, like, even if you wanted a great drawing exercise, even if you're not drawing in the line and color style, even if you're not making comics, try this. Trace your own lines. See if you can control that pressure. See if you can do this. And once you kind of get good at it, then you can play around with making it flow a little bit more. You could also make the brush a lot bigger, right? So in this way, I have to really work on my subtle pen pressure, because if I press too hard, I can easily ruin everything, and then I got to go back to the start. So it kind of makes pressure sensitivity into a little bit of a game, which sounds silly, but I found this to be really good. And it's one of the reasons why, even though this is really boring and really dumb, that it's a great thing to do. And it, you kind of just get into a flow where you're sort of sitting there going, I need to get this right. Like, can I do it in one go? Like, can I just make everything perfect in one go? Right, so you can see here I've got this giant brush, and what I'm trying to do is just press very softly. Practice just pressing very softly. And what I'm doing is I'm practicing moving the pen while going softly. Boom. All right. Let's hit, let's not delete that. Let's hit !/ That's going to lock it. I'm now going to create a couple of layers over there. And we'll also maybe look at, I don't have to turn all of those on, but yeah, let's turn that off. Cool. Let's move these over a little bit. Right, get a layer under there. Let's see whether I can fill this with a color, because I think it would be cool to experiment with some strong kind of colors here. All right. We've got this reference here, so I can just, this is kind of cheating, but I can totally just, get my colors directly from here if I want. That way, I've got a nice read on these pure colors. One of the things that, you often kind of find is that if you're looking at some cool colors that someone has done, they're often going to be way more exaggerated than you sort of think. And especially in the beginning, it's very easy to worry too much about all of your subtlety, and you can hide from putting bright colors in. And I would always recommend, just practicing again with the official colors. See if you can get that working. So we got here some, again, it looks like he sort of has dark here. All right, we got that brown there. Got the tail. We've got the boots. And we'll have to make that a little bit lighter, just so I think it kind of shows through. And then obviously this is little white socks or whatever. Boom. All right, what else have we got? I think it's the same color for the hair here, really. It's basically just simulating a black. So here again, when the other thing that you can really learn a lot about from just doing basic flatting is thinking about, how do you get and how do you match these shapes that you've already drawn? All right. This is excruciatingly boring, but again, one of the reasons I always do, and I keep saying this, one of the reasons I do real-time demos, so shout out if you're still here, if you're still hanging out, hopefully doing your own drawing or playing around or whatever. One of the reasons that I do this is because often when you are looking at sped up demos and all this kind of fancy TikTok style art on the internet where people are giving tips and talking about drawings and it's all kind of sped up, is you can kind of forget that, look, art takes a long time to make and it's often slow. And I think remembering that is really useful, because often it feels like, oh, this is taking literally forever. But actually, it's not taking that long. So what I'm going to do here is just select what's left. And that way, where's my skin color? I have a feeling this is super light skin color compared to what I would normally put in. Right, got this. And so I'm leveraging existing selections, existing lines. I'm trying to make everything as efficient as possible. You'll learn a lot about painting and sequence and how to build up shapes through doing these types of exercises. What else we got? This thing. And I might try to tone down some of this color. I feel like some of it's quite extreme. And this is kind of blue, but this is not blue. So I'm like, which? And that's white, but that's blue. What color is this stuff, guys? What is going on? I'm going to go with just that standard one that I started with in terms of color. But yeah, when we're doing these shapes, think about how you get those shapes, how you see if you can do it in one go. Just push that drawing ability. All right. Got this, got that. Now we can fill this in. So this also is one of these Sudoku puzzle style things. once you kind of get one thing, then you can get another thing, and you can kind of flat it all. Again, I find this stuff really relaxing. You know, you kind of just get good at chilling out, hanging out, doing whatever. Again, it looks like this rope is white. That for some reason did not pick up the right color. I think this might be a cool color actually to make that rope. I feel like white is a bit strong. I'm definitely going to have that sense to try and tone down some of these colors. But we'll see what it looks like. Again, the trick to practicing that and not just immediately making the everything kind of way too toned down and gutless is just to try it. Like just try the crazy exaggerated colors, right? Like kind of see what happens. Oh, that's right. I had that other bit there, right, where he kind of has the, like this thing is kind of connected to something. I totally forgot that. So let's look at that. What happens if you totally mess up and forget to add something? Really simple. All I'm going to do is make a new layer there. We'll swap back to the lines. We will see whether, did I put it in the drawing? I did. I put it in the sketch. So let's see whether I can put it in there and create a nice tangent for it. Maybe. Again, disaster averted. So we can see here, right? It's got that. It's like sort of purple, but then I think it has some of this around it. So again, that'll be good. All right, let's hide that. Let's now go back here. And what I got to do, right, is this is just this gray. We're going to undo, or actually I already did that. And now I'm just going to put in that flat. So the way I've organized this is that the bottom layer is still with this gray, right? So that's still with that gray. And this one above is where the color is. And that allows me to flat it a little bit easier, but it also means that is surprisingly cruisy. Now I can do that, and then I can pick purple, and we will, boom, put that in. Nice. Let's make that a lot darker. Cool. Okay. Oh, there we go. I filled that. I shouldn't be filling that. All right, let's try to do it a different way. Get the purple. That will cause trouble later on if I fill the whole thing, background. Purple, that's easier. All right, make it a bit darker. Put that there. All right, maybe that can be like that. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's working pretty well. All right, let's see if I can find some more red to put in here near the teeth. Then let's get some white for these teeth and put the teeth in there. Boom. Now let's get the eyes, white eyes. And should I create these shapes here with the flat? I think that's probably Hard to tell. What I'm going to do is hit 50%. So it's going to give me a gray so that this is not quite overwhelming that just yet. Like it's not fully creating its own shape. I'm going to use some of the line work that I've got. Now let's go back to 100%, see if I can clean that up. So I've basically got like a grayish color here. I don't know whether that's the best solution, but that's my solution for the moment. Now, again, if you wanted to really refine this, I can go through and, make sure that these are much more distinct around the face. All right, really kind of nail, get that. We could, polish this whole thing up a little bit if we wanted. The other thing we can do is, right, so I've got the lines. I have this second set of lines. What I could do is, let's increase the opacity of those so they are a lot darker. I feel like, you can see like that works as well. But if I did want to even push the eyebrows further, I can just duplicate those again, and where I want the eyes to be really dark, I can kind of push that. Likewise, I can, tweak and adjust where some of those darker lines go. But yeah, that's getting close to being done. And so what we've got here again is a really simple way of making art. Nothing fancy, nothing revolutionary. But I think this is even, it's not even strong enough. Oh, that's right. So we got G, tolerance is 32. Set the tolerance down if you want, and also, turn off anti-aliasing. And that'll allow that to feel a bit more dynamic like that. I feel like I want to dial back the purple here just a little bit. Just pull it back a tiny bit. Same with this. Let's dial that back just a tiny bit. I think I must have turned off dynamic sliders, so that's why those colors aren't updating properly. I feel like this brown here, like, not really digging it. I feel like adding a little bit of red there would kind of be good. But yeah, that's about it. Now we did have a blue kind of background. I could play around with that color. All right, make it a bit darker so the character really kind of pops off. And obviously there's a whole bunch of other things that you could add, to try and make it a little bit more interesting. We could think about adding some simple gradients. This is often part of the sort of simple process that I would kind of use, right? So thinking about adding some really basic kind of gradient colors might help brighten things up a little bit. Make it feel a little bit more dynamic and sort of warm. That can often be the thing that kind of makes the difference. You could also think about adding a little bit of a gradient to the background. Right, so it just feels a little bit more kind of dynamic, like there's something going there. You could also play around with, some of the things we were going to do, which is add a add some kind of graphical shape. Probably have to clip that there. Right. And also play around with, oh, go away, Adobe. And yeah, we could kind of play around with, what sort of color that is, or, how that kind of functions. Make it feel a bit more like maybe there's a shadow or there's something kind of floating. We're just adding little bits of sort of graphicness to the background will go a long way. So yeah, it can still just be, we're not really doing anything fancy. We're still using the same kind of brushes, but now it kind of has a bit more dynamism, right? But yeah, there we go. Really kind of simple line and color process. That's often all we need. And, the rest of it is just thinking about adding more subtlety to, the rendering, if that's how you sort of want to take it. There's always little things that we can do to plus it. Like something I often like doing is go back to we're just adding our sort of flat color, but, I could maybe think about increasing the sort of redness of the ear, adding a little bit of kind of subtlety there. Right, that'll just make it feel a little bit more sophisticated. Can think about that nail being a slightly different color. You can also, at this point, really select, if we undo contiguous, right, I can select all of that skin color and then think about maybe, maybe if I made it a little bit warmer, right, a little bit darker, that might make things feel a little bit more interesting. All right, we got to select this as well. So we go, right, that. I think we got most of it now. And those. Yeah, so Control H to hide, Control U. And here we can increase saturation. All right, pull that down a little bit. All right, saturation up. A little bit kind of darker. Yeah, that might kind of work a little bit better. Just sort of makes the eyes pop out a little bit more. Some of those features pop out a little bit more. But yeah, that's probably about it. You can also, once you've got all those colors, again, if you want to sort of play around with tweaking them a bit, think about, okay, let's go to the neutrals, right? Can I, oh, I've still got that selected. Let's undo that. All right, just say, let's make the whole thing warm, right? Like, let's really sort of push the warmth there. And this can be a great way to just make sure that the character feels way more sort of vibrant. Can then select the blacks, right? And let's make the blacks darker. We can also make them cooler, right? So there's a bit more contrast there. Again, you may or may not be able to see into the darks depending on your sort of monitor. But yeah, so a couple of little color tweaks, right? Just making it pop a little bit more. It's always hard to see whether or not that stuff kind of makes it that much better. But yeah, often, that can really help if you're just trying to push the vibrancy of it a little bit. But this is what we got so far. Let's make this a lot bigger. And then should be able to make it kind of really big. See what we kind of got. So in terms of this demo, this is a whole bunch of different things we have kind of played around with, experimenting with looking at character design, looking at breaking down proportion, anatomy. But the real thing here that I was wanting to sort of demonstrate is just taking a really simple character like this and using a really simple process as well to make sure that we're not spending time. If you imagine that every day, you want to sort of work on your art, you've got like 1 or 2 hours. If you focus more time on the drawing, construction, thinking about proportion, thinking about design, thinking about tangents, thinking about refining and sort of stepping through that process, you'll get better a lot faster. And that's why a simple process can be really useful early on. It allows us to focus on composition, color theory, drawing, how to put a picture together. It allows you to kind of get something that looks kind of, fairly polished in a much simpler, shorter amount of time. So that's kind of why I think a really simple, reliable process is good. That's what I teach in a lot of the sort of comic book style courses like the Line and Color Academy. And that's normally what I recommend if you're wanting to kind of learn to make art while drawing fun stuff. If you want to see how I take this type of process to a completely whole another level, you can check out this video where we use a similar process, but on a much, much more complicated scene. Other than that, catch you around. Happy drawing.